Hi, welcome to Ocean Yemi's channel. So today what I'm gonna do a little bit more on the Springfield riots as it involved Sonia Massey's ancestor. So there is some parts of it that is very important that I see. So I'm gonna see if I can get some of it done today. Okay, so I'm gonna play it from the start about the riots.
Springfield Race Riot of 1908. Published by Wikipedia. Springfield Race Riot of 1908 consisted of events of mass racial violence committed against African Americans by a mob of about 5,000 white Americans and European immigrants in Springfield, Illinois, between August 14 and 16, 1908. Black men had been arrested as suspects in a rape, and attempted rape and murder. Alleged victims were two young white women and the father of one of them. Mob seeking to lynch the men discovered the sheriff had transferred them out of the city. The whites furiously spread out to attack black neighborhoods, murdered black citizens on the streets, and destroyed black businesses and homes. State militia was called out to quell the rioting. Riot, trials and aftermath are said to be one of the most well-documented examples of the complex intersection of race, class, and criminal justice in the United States. 2008 an NPR report on the centenary of the race riot said that the fact of its taking place in a northern state, specifically in the land of Lincoln, demonstrated that black people were mistreated across the country, not just in the South, and described the event as a proxy for the story of race in America. 17 people died as a result of the riot. 9 black residents and 8 white residents who were associated with the mob, 6 of whom were killed by crossfire or state militias and 2 who died by suicide. Misreported for decades that only militia were responsible for white deaths and that more whites than black people had died. Personal and property damages, suffered overwhelmingly by black people, amounted to more than $150,000, as dozens of black homes and businesses were destroyed, as well as 3 white-owned businesses of suspected black sympathizers. As a result of the rioting, numerous black people left Springfield, but it is unclear how many moved away permanently. So in the following months over 100 riot-related indictments were issued and some pleaded guilty to minor violations. Only one alleged rioter went to trial and conviction for lesser offenses. 2 accused black men, who were the initial focus of the lynch mob, one was eventually tried, convicted and hanged, the other was set free. For the 100th anniversary in 2008, the city of Springfield erected historical markers and a memorial statue. Riot was a catalyst for the formation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, organized to work on civil rights for African Americans. Ground. 1908, Springfield was a transportation hub, connected by railroad to other major cities such as Indianapolis, Louisville, and Kansas City, etc. Illinois is often considered a microcosm of the U.S. in Springfield, with about 45,000 people at the time, most of whom were working class, was described as an average American community. Economy. July 1908, the U.S. was pulling itself out of the Panic of 1907, which occurred during a lengthy economic contraction between May 1907 and June 1908. Contraction led to suspension of cash payments by banks, a halt in lending, and a fall in the stock market, all resulting in significant economic disruption. Industrial production dropped, and the period saw the second highest volume of bankruptcies to that date, with the dollar volume increasing nearly 50%. Production fell over 10%, commodity prices dropped by more than 20%, imports fell by over 25%, and unemployment, which had been less than 3% prior to the panic, increased to 8%, resulting in fierce job competition. In April 1908, there were 200,000 unemployed men in Illinois, with 55% of those residing outside of Chicago. Comparatively, neighboring Iowa and Missouri, which had populations that were 40% and 60% of Illinois', had 2,000 and 43,000 unemployed men, respectively. Prior to the panic, over 1 million immigrants had arrived in the U.S. during each of the previous 2 years. However, after the panic, the rate of arrival began declining by nearly 40%. Its dependence on mines, railroad, and vice industries, such as saloons, Springfield was largely insulated from much of the contraction. However, the city still could not escape the economic downturn of the region, including new alcohol policies passed in 1908 that would suddenly put the employees at nearly 2,000 bars across the state out of work, including 20% of the saloons across Sangamon County. Growing unrest among railroad workers after the Illinois Central Railroad began a retrenchment policy in December 1907. Example, men in nearby Clinton saw their work week drop from 7 to 4 days a week by March 1908. Same month, the railroad also began streamlining positions to further cut expenses, which caused many to be bumped down to lower jobs, affecting younger workers. There was also uncertainty amongst Springfield's miners at the local and national level. November 1907, 4,000 miners in Danville went on strike when coal operators stopped paying workers in cash and began issuing checks. 5 months later, on April 1, 1908, Springfield's miners were nearly part of the 250,000 miners across the country who went on strike after their contracts expired and coal operators showed no inclination to make new contracts with the union. Illinois' 60,000 miners subsequently declared war against coal operators. Unrest led to the shutdown of Illinois' mines for a month, which had a significant negative impact on the freight business for the railroads as coal cars sat idle during that time. The lack of coal movement also impacted road workers, who could not pave the roads without the coal. In early May, while over 35,000 of Illinois' miners voted to return to work, miners in 2 districts voted to move forward with the strike, Peoria and Springfield. At the same time, miners in neighboring Decatur voted to go on strike and, on June 8, 1908, 500 miners called off 2 separate strikes at the Pawnee and Panna mines over work conditions. Ultimately, these events created a Springfield workforce where workers by and large had jobs, but the earning power of those jobs was being diminished, the security of those jobs was laced with uncertainty, and the respect paid to those who held those jobs was seemingly being diminished. Surrounding counties, the job prospects were similar or worse and the workforce was less diverse. Immigrants and race. Reconstruction came to an end. Between 1870 and 1890, the United States was undergoing a massive population increase. In 1890 and 1908, rapid industrialization and urbanization brought millions of European immigrants to the country. Arrivals usually came to Ellis Island, then trekked to cities where relatives had already been establishing themselves, expanding ethnic communities throughout the country. Springfield, a rapidly growing industrial center, was one of those cities. Turn of the century, Springfield's population was about 35,000 people and growing. 1900, the immigrant population, which prior to 1890 had only grown at a rate of 0.15% per year and remained stagnant at roughly 4,500, and to grow at a rate of 4% per year, a 300,000% increase. According to the United States Census Bureau, in 1908, nearly 35% of these immigrants were unable to speak English, and nearly 15% were illiterate. Created tension between white immigrants and white Americans, who feared their growing political presence. Americans were increasingly more negative, fearful, and xenophobic toward the immigrants, who they deemed to be biologically inferior, culturally and religiously odd, and generally substandard with a proclivity to filth, laziness and violence. In the country's racial hierarchy, European immigrants were perched below whites, but above black people, fending off degrading ethnic slurs such as hunky, Guinea, and Polak. In thought, grotesque in manner of life, the thrifty and laborious Pole is a conspicuous figure. So to learn even simple English, unable to express in our tongue any abstract ideas, one can only conjecture his inner life and mental attitude. Part in the drama of conflicting races has thus a silent, pantomimic effect. England Magazine, 1904. Such attitudes presented new immigrants with a choice: fight to become socially white, or align with politically and economically disadvantaged black people. An atmosphere where immigrants heard statements like, "one white man is as good as 2 or 3 Italians," and where whites were bringing lawsuits against their own family members who they suspected of having tainted black blood, immigrants opted to strive to become white. Country where the distinction between white man and black is intended as a distinction of value as well as ethnography, it is no compliment to the Italian to deny him his whiteness. Herbert F. Forster, economist, 1919. America is not a melting pot. It is a sizzling cauldron for the ethnic American who feels that he has been politically courted and legally extorted by both government and private enterprise. Ethnic American also feels unappreciated for the contribution he makes to society. Presents the way the working class is looked down upon. Fortunately, because of old prejudices and new fears, anger is generated against other minority groups rather than those who have power. Barbara Mikulski, former senator, 1970. White races proliferated alongside the science and ideology that imparted legitimacy to their existence. Color and race became detached in the case of whiteness. Instead, white came to be populated by a hierarchy of peoples, at the top of which was America's charter white race, the Anglo-Saxons, and a number of rank-ordered lesser white races. Sometimes lose sight of the lengths of which white Americans, especially of the working and lower classes, went to patrol the boundaries of white. However, it was always understood. A. Gerber, historian, 1999. Pressure to become white led to many immigrants seeking ways to prove their whiteness. Protecting and expanding the notion of white supremacy was deemed convincing evidence. Time, Black people were expected to be subservient, agreeable and deferential to whites or be subject to verbal abuse, threats or physical violence. Those who viewed Black people as being uppity would often impose quick and harsh retribution against them. Immigrants observed how white Americans treated Black people. They began not only mimicking such treatment, but also distancing themselves from Black people geographically and socially. Example, in the particular
Oh, okay, let's get to the other part then, because there was an anniversary held. Hold on, let me get to Sonia's ancestor. Okay, let me see. Is it still playing? Okay. So the victims of the lynching are when Charles Wilson was young, his grandfather William China Duggan showed him the site of Spring and Edward Streets where Wilson's grandfather William Duggan was lynched in 1908. At first, it was just like a conversation, but then as I grew older, it made me dislike white people, period, said Wilson, 84, a Springfield native who now lives in Chicago. Just the fact that they killed my granddad, other than he was married to Sarah, a white woman, never could find no reason. Wilson was raised by maternal grandparents William China Duggan and his wife Anna after his mother's death and in an auto trade accident in 1929, but they never shed too much more light on the subject. Sarah Duggan, who lived with the family for a time, didn't talk much of it either. Wilson loved his grandmother, a partly German Irish woman who taught him to remember his address and to be the best in whatever he did. I would ask her about Grandpa, and she'll say, they killed Grandpa because he was married to me. I can understand that. What's wrong with you? According to some of the sources, Duggan was born in Kentucky, 1832. Duggan wasn't a slave. As far as Wilson knows, he came to Springfield in 1832 and was a successful cobbler. Various sources state he was either 76 or 84 at the time of his murder. At the time of his murder, William Duggan was lynched shortly after 9 p.m. on the evening of August 15, 1908, according to August 16, 1908, Illinois State Journal. Several hundred boys and men converged on Duggan's home, and when Duggan and two other male inmates of the house attempted to run away after the mob had fired the house, Duggan was thrown to the ground and beaten up badly, and the newspaper article said the family name was spelled several ways, but Wilson said his most familiar was Deegan. Heated cries of lynch then word was raised, and a small rope was pronounced. occurred. Wilson and said rioters tried to set the house on fire, and Wilson's grandmother, Anna, fled with his mother, then an infant. The grandmother then raised me. Now she told me how she was running down the street with the baby, and a white lady reached out and said, "Here, get in here with that baby," Wilson said. My grandmother told me the lady kept her in the basement, but she said the lady told her, "Whatever you do, don't let the baby cry, because they will burn my house down." William Duggan died the next day after being lynched in the tree that was too short. He was left in a half standing, half hanging position for several minutes and having his windpipe severed in two places. Whenever it comes to the lynching out, I always feel it shouldn't have been, because it just shouldn't have been, Wilson said. Tamara Browning can be reached at 788. Oh, that's the number. Okay, so that was from the grandson. So we're gonna somehow go back to Sonia herself. How anti-black violence was traumatized Sonia Messey's family for generations.
Anti-black violence has traumatized Sonia Messey's family for generations. Published by Push Black. William K. Donegan was a prosperous shoemaker in Springfield, Illinois. In the 1850s and 1860s, Donegan was also an Underground Railroad conductor well known for sheltering many freedom seekers in his home as they escaped. August 1908, a race riot was brewing in Springfield, and 80-year-old Donegan, who was married to a white woman, sought police protection. That protection never came. A white mob broke into his home and lynched him. His murder catalyzed the establishment of the NAACP. 116 years later, his descendant, Sonia Messey, who was living with mental illness, called the police to her Springfield home. She was afraid of the police. She thought she heard someone trying to break in. Then an hour after Messey had called the police for help, Deputy Sheriff Sean Grayson shot her in the face. Donegan and Messey were pronounced dead at the same hospital. Made many powerful changes for ourselves over the past century, but policing hasn't. Black violence can't be prevented when it's foundational to a system never intended to protect us. People have always deserved long and beautiful lives without the fear of being killed by the police. Find ways to keep ourselves and each other safe physically, mentally, and spiritually. All we got. Rest in power, Sonia and William.
Rest in power, Sonia and William Messey. And that was his, that's her ancestor, continued from part one. Right, so they're saying it's a similar history. So, opinion I share with Sonia Messey makes me grieve her death even more. According to the family of Sonia Messey, the 36-year-old mother of two shot dead by the Illinois Sheriff Duty Deputy July the 6th. She was a descendant of William K. Duggan, who being a shoemaker and conductor on the Underground Railroad before he was lynched by a white mob during the Springfield race riots in 1908. Messey, they said, died at the same hospital, St. Anne's, where Duggan died after his white attackers slit his throat and hanged him from a tree outside his home. Like Messey, I'm a descendant of a black man who was lynched. My grandfather, Brett Bridges, was hanged from a tree in Mississippi in 1904. His son, Houston Buckley, who I call Papa, never knew his father, as he was born after the murder in 1980s when I was a child, and Papa in his early 80s. I saw him sitting in his old green recliner in the living room, his head in his hands sobbing. Then white folks lynched my daddy. Grandma couldn't have known when she married the young Houston that he would be mourning his murdered father. Even in his final years from the doorway of the kitchen that day, she urged him to pull himself together and to leave the past in the past. Yet the past was an ugly way of refusing to stay in its place. It took 20 years for me to publish We Are Bridges, a memoir I wrote to examine how this violent part of our past had impacted my family through the generations, to attempt to heal the fractured parts of me, to pass on the stories of our ancestors, including their beauty, laughter, and talents, to my son and generations not yet born. It is admittedly a lofty attempt at bridging the past, present, and future. It is my personal contribution to an ongoing battle against racism and patriarchy. And yet, as I wrote and reviewed the manuscript over the years, the ugliest parts of the past kept trying to outpace whatever progress there was, with one eye on the news and one on my developing manuscript. I tried to make sense of the unjust killings of Black people. Sean Bell, Eric Gunnan, Sandra Blaine, Tavon Martin, Tamir Rice, Armin Arbery, George Floyd happening in the real time. On my way home from work last week, a craving for homemade nachos hit me like a head-on collision. It wasn't until I was standing over my cutting board, chopping my onions and garlic for beans, that the source of a sudden longing dawned on me. Sonia Messey. I watched Sonia Messey's son, Malachi, tell a CPS news reporter how much he loved his mother and mother's food and described her as a loving ball of energy. I read an article that mentioned one of her cousins praising her shredded chicken nachos. As I ate the food I made, I felt the ache that seemed to scratch across me and space, stretch across time and space. This craving, I realized, representing an insipid demand for law enforcement to stop carrying out the country's legacy of lynching. After responding to Massey's 911 call about a possible um, intruder outside her home in Springfield, Illinois, uh, so County Sheriff Duty Sean Grayson shot and killed Massey while she was in the kitchen. Her kitchen, that place from which she created only joy for herself and her loved ones. Body cam footage shows that Grayson, who has been fired, is charged with first-degree murder, sent her to the kitchen to turn off a pot of boiling water. My ears burned at the profound laced threats to shoot her in the face. Profanity. And the popping of his pistol as he did just that. He shot her as she held the pot. She was 36-year-old Black mother whose family loved her, but Grayson killing her shows he could not see humanity. Maybe it's just a coincidence that the incidents such as these keep happening in presidential elections. George Floyd, 2020, Alton Sterling, Tevin Martin, 2012, Massey, 2024. Her ancestors, Duggan, and my great-grandmother, Bert Bridges, were lynched in presidential election years too. I'm not saying there is a connection, only that these are not you know, and that these crimes have often happened in the years was spending the most time thinking about the future of our country as a survivor of legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. We are here after all. I'm disgusted and dismayed, but never shocked by the domestic and racial terrorism that continues to perceive the free world. I have grown weary of writing about and talking about these injustices, but with each fatal shooting, beating, chokehold. My grandfather's name rings out to me. This problem is not one for Black people to fix. We have done the work of understanding the complexes of systematic violence, and it sits on the shoulders of people like Grayson and institutions that empower them. After watching the footage of Messey being killed by the volcanic buildup of a deep, long, ugly cry surged from my belly to my chest. I planted my face down into the bath towel I was holding and howled as loud as I could. My tears was not just my own. I was crying for Donna Massey, who broke down in tears in that CPS News and interview under the unbearable grief of losing her daughter. I'm crying with and for the papa too. Jack Campbell, the sheriff who has faced calls to resign over the hiring of the former deputy who fatally shot Sonia Massey inside her Springfield, Illinois home, announced Friday that he will resign at the end of the month. Yeah, and that's it. So I think there might be a part 3, but I'll see how this goes. So this is the Springfield riots. It just shows that how there's a generational thing in Springfield, Illinois, against it's race. I mean, racism is everywhere, and the history shows a repeat is generational, and people do not understand difference or don't want to understand difference. Sounds to me like Sonia Massey's grandfather literally was a earning man, a man who earned and was looking after his family, and he was an older man because he was 84. So for them to honor life him the way they did is very, I don't know, can't think of the word, but very, very dramatic, very evil. Evil, that's the word. Very evil. So basically, I was trying to do this video to show the connections between Sonia Massey and her ancestor, and how like how it's like they were assassinated for causing change, for being different. She, even though she had her mental health thing, she had love. The community knew her, just like her grandfather. The Springfield riots also it puts me in mind of Rosewood. I think is a real place, the Black Wall Street and other places where people have been unalived because of color, because of whatever, jealousy, whatever it is, because somebody of a different colors died, then deaths occurred, then it's like a whole massacre. And this is, I think, Springfield riots bears no exception. Now, the 2 men that I show with the picture with Sonia's grandfather is 2 men who was lynched probably another time or about the same time he was lynched. So with that said, I'm going to leave it right there. I'm not going to prolong this. I'm not going to make this longer. I'm just going to leave it right there. And if I feel that I got to come back and do a live, I'll do a live on it. Or if not, I'll just do an upload. So with that said, I'll see you. Please leave a comment underneath the video. Until next time, I'll see you later. Take care. Bye.